Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get pre-orders of all the upcoming Force of Will sets, as well as releases of previous sets after they come out. CCGprime.com with over 100,000 Force of Will singles, as well as out-of-print boxes from the past, and TCG accessories, as well as FowlLibrary.com, a wonderful resource for deck lists, article discussions, and more. Check them out at FowlLibrary.com, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer members Fight Ramen and Shukong Fu. Thank you for your support. Class is in session.
Hey guys, welcome back to Ruler School, the Yearbook. I'm Paul, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 20 water cards from Grimm Cluster all the way up through Saga Cluster. This is an exciting time to be talking about Wanderer because I don't know if you've just seen it, but Wanderer is soon going to be the primary format for Force of Will. So if you're just getting into Force of Will, these are some of the cards you're going to want to think about, if not pick up. There are also going to be some supplementary products coming out very soon to help support your new Wanderer format, getting into it and stuff. So these are the top 20-ish cards that you're really going to want to take a look at if you're going to be getting into the game of Force of Will. And of course, these cards are going to be exceptionally more powerful once Wanderer is finally implemented as the primary format for Force of Will starting in August of this year. So let's get into talking about this. Again, these are the top 20 cards that are spanning from Grimm Cluster all the way through until Saga Cluster. We're not quite done with Duel Cluster yet, so I don't want to judge those cards quite yet until we've seen all of them and how they affect the metagame. And we'll be seeing those pretty darn quick now that the GP season is going to be getting underway here fairly quickly. Anyway, this is number 20 in this entire list, and that is going to be Voice from the Void. So the reason I put this card at number 20 is because this is quintessentially the best draw card outside of something like Priscia, Seeker of Friends, right, or Cheshire Cat, which will be coming up a little bit later on this list. If you're going to be talking about cards that draw you cards for the sake of drawing you cards, Voice from the Void is probably the best. And the reason is because it's very low cost. It has Remnant in the graveyard if your hand is empty, which is kind of nice, frankly. But also you can do things like cast it from hand, and then before this card, you can cast a card from hand, and when your hand is empty, then play this card for free from your graveyard to draw a second card. So there's ways you can play around with this card because of the null mechanic that make it really different than something like Foresee. Which is not on this list because I feel like it's one of those cards that has its niche, but Voice from the Void is probably one of the more playable blue draw cards. That being said, it's all the way down to number 20, mostly because a lot of decks are not necessarily playing this, but it is a normal. It's really easy to get a hold of. It is there in case you're playing a blue deck and you need a little bit of extra draw, and you don't have room for resonators that make any sense. All that being said, solid card. It's in the top 20 for a reason. So pick up your play sets as soon as you possibly can. I guarantee they are going to be super, super cheap. Next up at number 19, we have Adombrali, the Unfathomable. Now, for longtime veterans of the game of Force of Will, man, what do I say about this card? This card enables some really wacky combos. If you don't know how this works, it uses what's called the Incarnation Engine, which is you basically tribute off 2 resonators from the field, and you just play this card from your hand as though you had paid its cost. So it's an alternative cost card that comes in. It has decent stats. Even though it is high costed, you have an alternative cost in Incarnation, which is really great. And then depending on the resonators you sack off or banish for the effect of for the Incarnation summoning of this card, you essentially get different effects. White, you gain life. Fire, you deal damage. Darkness, you drain. Blue, you draw a card. And for green, you generate a will of any attribute. And especially for the blue and the green effects, this card is absolutely fantastic. Not only do you draw a card, you're able to produce a will of any attribute that you wish because you got rid of a card that you basically traded up into to play this card. So even though you go -1 in card advantage, you're basically replacing that card that you banished off for the incarnation effect, and then you're also producing a Will of any attribute that you can use to play any of the various one-cost cards that are currently in the game. That being said, it is a combo card, which means that Adombrali has not seen a ton of play as of late. This card has a very long history in the metagame, though. When it first came out in Alice Cluster, it was one of the best blue cards that we had seen up to that date. So this card was actually really, really solid for its time. And personally, as someone who continues to see more Cthulhu's come into the game, and see other ways that we could potentially make combo plays with this card might sneak up more on this list, but it's always one of those cards you want to keep your eyes on. So Adombrali is at number 19. Next up, we have one of the best additions that Blue has access to, and that is Lightning Cave. Lightning Cave is possibly one of my favorite cards ever printed, mostly because it's a Shayla support card. Not because of how good it is, but mostly because it's a Shayla support card. This is your anti-aggro card in blue. This card says if your opponent has anything that is not a water card, it loses flying and swiftness. And then it has effects that you can tap to make it raining if it's not raining, and you can tap it to make it lightning, to light the thunderstorm if it is raining out. So this card has weather effects that work really well with Shayla, but in general, as a sideboard card, it's there to just basically say to your opponent, you don't get to go off unless you get rid of this card, which is kind of nice. It's one of the best sideboard cards that we currently have in the Wanderer format, and it's really useful if you're playing against something like the new Prisia deck, or the Prisia deck that gains flying and swiftness on stuff that is basically your Guardian Dragon of the Kingdom or your Isis or anything like that. This card basically stops that deck in its tracks. It's a really good floodgate for that particular reason. So this card is on the list. It's not higher up because it's not pivotal, but it is a very good tool to have in your tool belt for when you go into your sideboard building. Next up, we have number 17, which is, again, another one of my favorite cards the Force of Will has printed. It's Optional Possession. This card is a Swiss Army knife. It has Remnant, it has Quick Cast, you can gain Precision, First Strike, Flying, you can gain +2/+2. This card has a lot of just really good applications. It's one of my favorite cards in our Ruler School Cube, just because of how versatile it is. Blue is really good at that. They can sometimes produce some really good one-cost spells that enable you to do some really interesting things to sort of either get over a Resonator. It is a battle trick, although, so keep that in mind. Battle tricks are not super good in Force of Will currently. However, this card should definitely be on your radar. If you have a couple of spots open in your deck and you're like, I just need a little bit of utility here and there to be able to either fly over something for game or to be able to get something off the field, Optional Possession is a very, very, very good card for that particular reason. That being said, one of the other really good support cards in this color is Charlotte's Water Transformation Magic. Man, when this card came out and we still had Bow, the Artemis Bow, my god, like, this card was amazing. It created the term Bow the Bear, because you turn something into a bear that was a 4/4, and then your Artemis Bow would hit over 400 damage, and so you'd Bow the Bear, which is still one of my favorite terms this card game has ever produced as a meme. It's wonderful. You cannot bow the bear nearly as much, although there is a card in the metagame called Pierre, the Godspeed Archer, which does 400 damage to something. So if you're playing some sort of white-blue combination of cards, and you're playing Pierre and you're playing this card, that can be really helpful. Arguably right now, the best way to use this card is to just sort of blank your opponent. This thing basically turns any Resonator into a 4/4 bear with no abilities, nothing like that. It has Remnant, it has Quick Cast. This card has a lot of applications, probably more applications than Optional Possession, which is why I put it higher up on this list in general. This card is one of those cards where if you're able to get 4 of it, it's just always going to be a really solid option. It's probably one of the best blue cards for its utility that we could ever have in the game itself. So definitely pick these up if you possibly can. It is just squeaked out by the utility of some other cards in the game, unfortunately, but this card is still really powerful, and it's something that when I look to blue, this is one of the first cards that comes to mind. So now we're moving up to the now we're moving into number 15, Shackles of Ice. Shackles of Ice is one of the coolest floodgate cards I think I've ever seen in this game. It's a card that basically says your opponent's ruler cannot play activate abilities. That means things like God's Art. It means tap abilities for your activate. It means things like 0 mana, do a thing whenever you want sort of effects. This basically says no to Reflect Refrain, which is super funny. This card has a lot of applications. Again, it's a sideboard card. You may not want to play it unless you're just completely not hosed by it, but essentially it takes your ruler's activate abilities against you and just says, yeah, those aren't even a factor anymore. Where this is really applicable is against the Fallen Angel rulers that we have. So if you're worried about Belial doing the God's Art and saying, you know, I can't lose the game anymore, you slap this down and suddenly that becomes a lot harder for them to manage. So Shackles of Ice, really good sideboard card. It's one of those cards that, again, when you think of blue, this is one of those cards that my mind goes to. It's not as good as some others, so we're going to continue going and looking at the next cards. So next up, at number 14, we have Spinning Aquasol. This is a quick cast blue chant for 1 that basically says put a chant from your graveyard into your hand. This is some of the best chant recycling that we have in the game. There is a green card that does this as well. There's quite a few of the green cards that do it, that do this effect as well. Specifically Elixir's Love, which is on the wind list, which we haven't done yet, but it is on the list because it has this effect. And this card is just kind of nutty for the fact that it gets you able to reuse certain chants from your graveyard. It is, in my estimation, better than Elixir's Love, specifically because this is a 1 cost and Elixir's Love is a 2 cost. And it's in a really wacky color as well. So the fact that Spinning Aquasol is only a 1 cost is really, really good. And it just allows you to recycle that card. And there are a lot of really good chants in the game, so this card is pretty high up on the list for that particular reason. Next up, once I find it, we can talk about it. Bewildering Charm is number 13 on this list. This card has maybe been power crept a little bit by a card that we got in Duel Cluster, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in some other videos I have planned. Bewildering Charm, though, is one of those cards where it really started to make blue look a little bit more interesting. And the reason is because it is a quick cast, 1 cost blue card that says put target Resonator back into the opponent's hand or draw a card. That has a lot of utility in the sense that basically it's not a free draw card, but it's optional, and if you don't need it to function that way, you essentially get to say put that back into your opponent's hand. Tempo cards in the game are typically not seen to be very, very good, but this is one of those cards that potentially has more applications, especially as we move into a Wanderer only format. This card has applications to not only recycle your own stuff, your own enter effects, by putting those things back into your hand, or by slowing your opponent's tempo plays down a little bit too. And it's only for 1, which is probably the best way to put these effects into the game, is just put them on a 1 cost quick cast card that has high utility but is, you know, not going to cost you too much in terms of card economy. So this card is pretty good. There is another card in the game that, like I said, that might creep this a little bit, because it can target anything on the field, not just a Resonator. That being said, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on down the road. So Bewildering Charm is number 13. Next up, we have our first rune on the list, which is Return of God. Now, if you remember our last 2 videos where we talked about runes in the game, the runes were actually pretty low on the list. So for our light video, we had Blade of Faith, I think, at number 20. In our fire video, we had, let me get the name, Spiral of Chaos at number 19. And now we have the Return of God. Middle point of this list. Now, why is Return of God so much better than these other runes? And the reason I would say is because this card can cheat out things that have no business being cheated out. This card is absolutely fantastic, especially it makes Loki one of those rulers that is actually interesting to play around with, in my opinion. It still has some validity in not New Frontiers, but in Wanderer for that particular reason. This card is one of those cards that says, if you play me right, you can do some really, really nutty things. I would invite you to look at all the implications this card has, because there are a lot of really good enter effects in the game, and this card triggers those. It's not just removal, it's not just a cheat in, it's a way to make your enter effects really, really, really strong. So, Return of God is number 12 on my list. Next up we have Neverend, the Fairy Tale Dragon. Now, why is this card so good? Why is this better than Return of God? Well, this is one of those cards that can just give your field Eternal, and Eternal is a very good keyword in this game, because it basically says you can't kill me by battle, and you also can't, make me destroy my own stuff. You can make me banish, but you can't make me destroy my own stuff, which is really, really, really solid. On top of that, it is a win con in and of itself. As the game goes on, it draws you a card when it enters, and then it can just give your whole field Eternal, and it's a 15/15 with flying. This card is not only a staple for Fairy Tale decks, but it's a really good card in general if you just have a lot of entities on board, like additions, or if you have a ton of stuff in your graveyard. It's a 1 cost, which means it works with Magna's Guardian Beast, which is something we saw a lot of in the Saga Cluster format when Feasting Mujdart was a big component of that metagame. Neverend is just really, really solid. And speaking of Feasting Mujdart, one of my favorite cards going into this is Valentina, owner of the theater. This basically just steals your opponent's board. It comes in, steals your opponent's board. It is, again, tempo is not very good as a deck type in Force of Will, but if tempo were really strong, this would probably be the top end, right? Because this thing basically just steals all of your opponent's tempo by stealing their entire Resonator board. Really solid. It's taken a little bit of a hit now that we're moving into Duel Cluster, and there are J rulers that come out that do some really pivotal things, because basically your whole deck is J rulers potentially. It can't steal those, but it can steal the rest of your opponent's board, which is pretty funny. So even if you just get one Resonator, this card basically replaces itself and gives you a pretty big swing. In other card games, taking control of Resonators is heavily Resonators, creatures, monsters, like those styles of effects are pretty well guarded. There's a lot of specifications around that, and basically all your opponent's stuff will go back to them if you kill this card. But you're basically playing this at the top end, so that way you steal your opponent's stuff for game, and you just kind of go from there. This card is super fun. In Feasting Mujdart recently, it was a way of just eliminating your opponent's board so you could attack in without any blockers blocking your stuff. I could go on and on about this card, but this card is one of the best cards that was printed in Rebirth of Legend. So if you have an opportunity to get these as well, there's some fun you can have with those. Next up, we're going to talk about one of our Wanderer promo reprints in Loki's Insight. This is one of the very few discard spells that Blue has, and what's interesting about this card is you could play it in the Rune deck, of course, if you're playing Loki, or if you're playing Arthur, but as a quick cost card that says take 2 of your opponent's quick cast cards out of their hand and put them into the graveyard, this card is pretty decent for what it does. It's something you can sink your will into during a recovery step, so you can just steal a couple of your opponent's cancels, quick cast Resonators, whatever. Quick cast is one of the best keywords in the game, if not the best keyword in the game. So this card has a lot of potential targets for it in your opponent's hand. That being said, I can't overstate how powerful Quick Cast is as a mechanic. So being able to just steal 2 of those cards from your opponent's hand, not only are you taking, you're going +1 in terms of card economy, but you're also just getting rid of 2 tools your opponent could potentially have to get rid of your own stuff that you want to play, plus you see their hand. All very good reasons to put this card very high up on the list. Next up, we have Flute Shion's Attendant. This card is one of the quintessential refill your hand cards that Blue has access to. Basically, you rest a recovered ruler or J ruler that you have, and you're able to refill your hand up to 4 minus X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So there's ways that you can play around with this, because if cards are on the chase, they're not in your hand, so you're able to sort of gain additional cards that way. It's kind of fun how it works with Voice from the Void a little bit, other cards as well. This card is just one of those, if you need to refill your hand at any point and you just need a card to offer that utility to you, Flute is just one of those really strong cards, and I can't really underestimate or understate, excuse me, how good refilling your hand is in a game that depends on you having a hand. So like for instance, I play this in my Kaguya list for Duel Cluster right now. My Kaguya list tends to run out of cards at times, and so having a way to refill my hand is pretty nice. That being said, it's higher up on the list because it's probably the best card we have that refills your hand. So there you go. Next up, we have some of the best removal that Blue has to offer, and that is Thunder Parasol. So Mermaid's Thunder Parasol is a treasury item, which means that once you use it, it'll go back into the deck. It's just very powerful. 400 damage for any card in your hand, which means that you're taking out most things with just 3 cards in your hand after you cast this card. This card is solid. It's removal that basically goes back into your deck and you can use it at any time. It's 1 cost, which is really, really good. And the fact that you never go -1 when you play this, right? You may lose it from your hand, but it always goes back into the deck. And then, of course, it shuffles the deck, which means that anything you've mulliganed in this game will go right back into the deck, meaning you're able to draw it out. Card is really, really solid. I don't know what else to say about it other than it's just really good, cheap removal. That has a lot of potential in the game. Next up, we have Mariabella, Sincere Engineer, as well as Heart to Heart Talk. Heart to Heart Talk is one of the best cards that Blue has ever seen. It basically says if your ruler, it's technically a void card, which I don't know if that's enough of a reason to not put it on this list, but I think it is very, very solid. It not only supports decks that have void cost activate abilities like Violet or Wolfgang. It also operates as a way to get a 1-cost machine out of the deck and put it onto the field. So that means it has applications in like Machina decks. It has potential in the new Deus Ex Resonator. I'm sorry, not Resonator. New Deus Ex Ruler that's coming out in Duel Cluster. This card has the potential to do some really interesting things as the game goes on. I would say it's even a staple Blue card at this point. This card might go up on the list more and more as time goes on, but right now, the things that it's doing is basically supporting Violet, somewhat supporting Wolfgang 2, the demonic world resonator ruler guy that allows you to cheat out additions from the deck. There's also potential applications for this in other decks as the game goes on, so this is why this card is so high up, but not at the tip top. Next up, we have, for the first time, a 3-way tie for this, because they all kind of do the same thing. We have Arondight, the Nitrogen Blade at number 5, Keez's Call at number 5, and Prison in the Lunar Lake at number 5. Now, why do I have all of these basically at the same level? Like, why are they tied for 5th place? And the reason is because they all kind of do the same thing, but a little bit different. So let's look at Keez's Call first, because this is the easiest one to explain. It stops an automatic ability of a Resonator, and then you draw a card. And it's all at quick cast speed, and it's a 1 cost. So this in and of itself, it replaces itself. It stops your opponent from getting an enter effect, from getting a trigger in the graveyard. Pretty much any automatic effect of a Resonator that goes onto the chase as an object can be stopped by this card, which is really, really strong. This is, again, another really solid staple Blue card. That when I think of Blue, I think of this card. It's Lorate without a body. It's Lorate without being able to stop activate effects. It has utility, which is really, really strong. That being said, Arondight the Nitrogen Blade, essentially the same thing. Although, if you awaken it, it destroys the Resonator that put that automatic effect onto the chase. So this has applications for if you go into the long game, or if you just have like a rune deck that allows you to produce extra will. There is a card in the rune deck that can do that. So just be aware of that. Lunar Prison in the Lunar Lake is one of the very few stealth cards that is still really good. Technically, it's not a stealth card. It's a trigger a chant standby trigger card, which we have not seen in the game for a very, very, very long time, but we do have promos of this card. So basically, if you control a water magic stone, and your opponent puts an automatic trigger onto the chase, you not only stop that automatic effect, that automatic object on the chase, you non-targeting destroy the resonator that did that. So in a way, it's cheap in that if you're playing certain decks, you can play one to put it face down in the chant standby zone, or in most decks, you're probably going to put two. If you're base water and you're using either a lot of water magic stones, this card is really strong for that reason. It does not target, which means it gets around barrier. So depending on what deck you're playing, you may play one or two of these over the others, which is important for us to recognize. But in general, this sort of exemplifies the card that stops automatic effects, and most of the time they're going to be in blue. I suppose you could also put Glimpse of Kaguya in here as well, because Glimpse of Kaguya, instead of doing automatic effects, it does activate abilities and you draw a card, but it's a little bit too high costed to make this list, in my opinion. It's still a good card, it's still out there, it still kind of does the same thing, but activate abilities are not nearly as good as automatic abilities in this game, so that's why it didn't make the list. But these three cards, very solid cards. All of them have promos because they're highly sought after. That being said, let's go into number 4, which is Dolly, the Electric Dolphin for Olivia. Olivia is probably one of the better water rulers that we have in the game, outside of something like Mujdart. Dolly is one of those cards that gives you access to a whole engine, and it has multimodal effects. It prevents itself from doing things randomly if you want it to. This card just has a lot of applications. A lot of random effects in the game suddenly become not random. Regalia rulers love Dolly because all of a sudden your random stranger from your stranger deck is now whatever stranger you want, which basically turns that deck into whatever you want it to be. Draw that card. This card is just really, really, really solid. It opens up things like your title stone that you got for Olivia in Saga Cluster. It means that you can play this and a couple of the board wipe addition destruction card that Olivia has. This card is just really good. Pulsing Thunder alone is enough of a reason for you to look at Dolly and say, this might be an engine that I can use. This card is just overall very solid. It can put a resonator back into the opponent's hand or into your own hand. You can draw a card, you can produce blue will off of it, and pretty much the blue production alone makes this card definitely one of the top 5 cards ever made, and it's at number 4 for a reason. Next up, we have Academy Guard of Lykeion. This basically says to your opponent, you don't get to play combos anymore. This card is very interesting. We just got a promo for this one as well. But Academy Guard of Lykeion is a 1-cost quick cast that can pretty much say no to any combo deck in the game. If folks want to play multiple cards, they can't really do that anymore because you can only play one Resonator or Chant per turn. That's you and your opponents. You have to be careful of that. But in control decks, this card is just phenomenal. It's quick cast speed, which again is probably one of the best keywords in the game, bar none. And the next card we're going to talk about also has quick cast, which is Fiola, Spirit of Oblivion. This is the one and only cancel, quote unquote, that we have in blue. And it doesn't really cancel anything. It basically just says anything that's a non-resonator on the chase when this card enters the field goes to the bottom of the deck. That's Addition, Regalia, Chant, and because it doesn't cancel, it gets around that stipulation. So if a card can't be canceled, this card isn't canceling it because it's putting it on the bottom of the deck instead of letting it resolve. If a card moves from the chase to anywhere else before it fully resolves, that card basically is done. Cancels are typically how you remove those things from the chase, but there are a few other effects in the game that move that card from the chase somewhere else, and this is one of those cards. And it's in blue, so there's a lot of applications here, right? And then it just has a really good grave effect where if you have a water J ruler on your field, you can just remove it from the game and give it some additional stats. I believe it's +5/+5, which is not insignificant. That's some pretty good damage addition, right? And you can do that at instant speed. So you can do some things where if your opponent's putting like a negative effect on the board where it's like -X, you can boost your Resonator that is a J Ruler because you're playing an order deck, or you can just boost your J Ruler in general and give it a little bit of extra stats to survive that effect. This card is just really solid. There's a reason this card is like $8-9 right now. This card is kind of hard to get, but it's also just like really solid. And of course, you've guessed it, the last card, probably the oldest card on this list, but honestly still the best blue card ever printed in the game of Force of Will, especially for the Wanderer format, that is still legal, is Cheshire Cat. Cheshire Cat is the quintessential blue card. You play it, it has barrier. Actually, it's got even more than that. It's got hexproof because you can't even target it with stuff. It's a 0/2, which is fine because what you're playing it for is the draw effect. So you basically get to draw 2 cards and then put 1 card from the top from your hand back on the top of your deck. That makes it really good for Shion. Any deck that wants to guess the top card, this card is absolutely one of the best cards to help you do that. Your opponent can't get rid of it with removal unless it's some kind of board wipe, and then if you chump block with it, it gets shuffled back into the deck once it hits the graveyard. This card is one of the best, if not the best blue card ever printed, all for the fact that it is an engine unto itself. You play 4 of this, you need additional draw cards in the deck, here you go. Back in the day when this card was standard in the format, people would jam water sources into their deck in order to play Cheshire Cat. That's how good it was. And I would say it is still one of the best blue cards printed. That being said, you'll notice Electo is not on this list because Electo was banned shortly before the filming of this video. So Electo would have been our original #1 blue card in the Wanderer format if it wasn't already banned. And that's kind of going to be the standard. If it's on the ban list, it's not going to be in the video. So don't be looking for cards that you think are better, because if they're not legal, they're not in the video. Anyway, guys, this is the top 20 Wanderer cards from the Grimm Cluster all the way through Saga Cluster. These are the cards you'd be picking up right now. Cheshire Cat has a couple of reprints out there right now, but I think hopefully we will see some reprints of this card coming in the future. One of the best cards you will ever play, period. So that being said, guys, if you like this video, if you like what we're doing, let us know by hitting subscribe and the bell. Hit that like button, leave us a comment. Are the cards in this order the way you would have put them, or would you have put other blue cards on this list? These are the best generic cards that I could come up with, but I really want to hear your opinion, so let us know down in the comment section down below. All of that being said, this has been Paul with another yearbook video. I'll see you next time as we talk about the next 20 win cards. Bye, guys.